The last call bell was a sound of finality, a gentle chime that sliced through the low murmur of the bar and signaled the end of my shift. It was a sound I had come to associate with a specific kind of relief, the quiet hum of exhaustion mixed with the promise of solitude. For the past 6 months, my life had been pared down to these simple transactions: pour the drinks, wipe the counters, walk the 12 blocks to my small apartment, and fall into bed. It was a safe, predictable loop, a world I had built for myself out of necessity, brick by monotonous brick. The Croft, the bar where I worked, was the cornerstone of that world. It was a place of dark wood, soft leather, and the hushed reverence of a library. It didn't cater to the loud or the fleeting. It was a sanctuary for people who appreciated the slow burn of a good whiskey and the weight of a comfortable silence. And then there was Julian Croft, the owner, the man whose name was etched into the frosted glass of the front door. He was a quiet fixture in his own establishment, often occupying the corner booth with a laptop or a thin ledger, a ghost in a perfectly tailored suit. He was older than me, maybe by 20 years, with touches of silver at his temples that seemed less like age and more like a deliberate, elegant accent. He rarely spoke to me beyond a polite, "Good evening, Leo," or a "Thank you. Close up when you're ready." Yet, I watched him. I observed the way his presence settled over the room, a calm, grounding force. I noticed the fine lines around his eyes when he listened, truly listened, to one of his regulars. I saw the way his long fingers would rest on his glass, still and contemplative. He was a man of immense wealth. I knew that much from the hushed gossip of the other staff, but he wore it like a well-loved coat, not a suit of armor. It was simply part of him, unremarkable in its fit. My fascination was a secret I kept tucked away, a small, warm ember in the otherwise cool landscape of my life. It was harmless, I told myself. A quiet admiration for a man who had built something beautiful and lasting. It was nothing more than that, because anything more was a complication I couldn't afford. My life before this had been full of complications: a failed business, a relationship that had crumbled under the financial strain, the slow, painful process of rebuilding from less than zero. The Croft, and my simple job within it, was my truce with the world. I wasn't looking to start another war, especially not one within myself. Tonight, the last patrons drifted out into the cool night air, their goodbyes echoing softly in the now empty room. I collected the last of the glasses, the clinking sound unnaturally loud in the quiet. Julian was still in his booth, but his laptop was closed. He was staring at the far corner of the bar, at the magnificent, silent beast that was the Wurlitzer jukebox. It was a beautiful antique, a symphony of chrome and colored glass and polished wood, but it had been broken for weeks. The repairman had come, shaken his head, quoted a price that made even the day manager blanch, and left it for dead. Its silence felt like a missing heartbeat in the room. I saw a flicker of something in Julian's expression, not annoyance, but a deep, quiet sadness, a frustration that seemed personal. It was a crack in the stoic facade I was so used to observing from a distance. He looked, for a moment, not like the billionaire owner of a city landmark, but like a man missing a piece of his home. And in that moment, a reckless impulse took root in me. It was a foolish, risky thing, to step outside the clearly defined lines of my role. I was the bartender. He was the owner. The chasm between us was vast, but I had always been good with my hands. I knew how to coax life back into tired machinery. It was what was left of my old life, the one where I built custom furniture instead of pouring gin. Wiping my hands on my apron, I took a breath and walked over to his booth. The air around him seemed different up close, warmer, scented faintly with something clean and expensive, like sandalwood and old paper. "Mr. Croft," I started, my voice feeling rough and unused. He looked up, his gray eyes focusing on me with a quiet intensity that made my stomach tighten. There was no surprise in them, only a patient sort of waiting, as if he had known I was approaching. "Leo," he acknowledged, his voice a low, smooth baritone. "The jukebox," I said, gesturing with my chin toward the dark machine. "I know a bit about electronics. Old ones, mostly. Wiring, tubes. If you'd like, I could take a look. No promises. And no charge, of course. Just, I hate seeing it sit there like that." I held my breath, waiting for the polite dismissal, the gentle reminder of my place. I had overstepped. The silence stretched, and I could hear the hum of the ice machine in the back, a sound I'd never noticed before. Julian's gaze didn't leave my face. He was assessing me, not my offer, but me. He was reading the lines of my sincerity, the nervous energy I was trying so hard to contain. Then, the corner of his mouth lifted in a small, almost imperceptible smile. It transformed his face, softening the stern lines and letting a hint of warmth through. "I would like that very much, Leo," he said, and the simple words felt like a door swinging open on well-oiled hinges. "The tools are in the back office. Whatever you need. Take your time." He didn't question my ability. He didn't haggle or set conditions. He just accepted. He trusted me. And that simple act of faith felt more significant than any paycheck I had ever earned. It was the start of something, though I didn't know what. It was the first note of a song I hadn't realized I was waiting to hear. The back office was as impeccably organized as the man himself. A heavy wooden desk, a single leather chair, and a wall of built-in shelves holding ledgers and a few framed photographs, their faces turned away from the door. On a lower shelf was a large, old-fashioned metal toolbox. It wasn't the cheap plastic kind. It was heavy steel, worn at the corners, filled with tools that had seen real work. They felt solid and right in my hands. I found a multimeter, a set of fine-tipped screwdrivers, and a soldering iron. Carrying them out into the main room felt like preparing for a delicate surgery. Julian had not moved from his booth, but he had poured himself a small measure of amber liquid in a heavy crystal glass. He watched me as I approached the jukebox, his expression unreadable, but his attention absolute. It wasn't the gaze of a supervisor. It was something quieter, more curious. The weight of his eyes on my back was a strange pressure, both unnerving and grounding. It made me want to do this right. I knelt before the Wurlitzer. It was even more beautiful up close. The glass was thick, the chrome trim cool to the touch. With a careful twist of a latch, I opened the main panel. The scent of old dust, ozone, and warm vacuum tubes wafted out, a perfume of forgotten technology. The inside was a labyrinth of wires, relays, and mechanical arms, a miniature city of dormant industry. For the first time in months, I felt a flicker of my old self, the man who found solace in complexity, who could find the single broken thread in a tangled mess and make it whole again. "Can I get you anything?" Julian's voice came from behind me, closer than I expected. I turned my head to see him standing a few feet away, his glass in his hand. "Coffee? Water? Coffee would be great, if it's not too much trouble," I said, my voice a little rough. "No trouble at all," he replied, and moved back toward the bar. I watched him for a moment. He moved with an economy of motion, a quiet confidence that was in every line of his body. He operated the gleaming espresso machine with the same focused calm he applied to everything else. He was a man who was comfortable in his own space, in his own skin. I turned back to the jukebox, focusing my attention on the power supply first. That was usually the culprit in machines this old. The capacitors could dry out. The transformers could burn out. I clipped the leads of the multimeter to the main terminals, my fingers moving with a forgotten muscle memory. As I worked, I was acutely aware of the small sounds of the room. The soft hiss of the espresso machine, the quiet click of a cup being set on a saucer, the whisper of Julian's leather-soled shoes on the wooden floor. A few minutes later, a ceramic mug was placed gently on the floor beside me. "Black, 2 sugars," Julian said. "I hope that's right. I've seen you make it for yourself at the start of your shifts." My hand froze for a second. He noticed that? He noticed a small detail like how I took my coffee. It was such a tiny thing, but it sent a strange warmth spreading through my chest. It was the feeling of being seen. I had spent so long trying to be invisible, to move through the world without leaving a ripple, that the sensation of someone's focused, quiet attention was startling. "It's perfect," I said, my voice softer than I intended. "Thank you, Mr. Croft." "Julian," he corrected gently. "I think if you're going to perform open-heart surgery on my jukebox, you can call me Julian." "Julian," I repeated, testing the name on my tongue. It felt different, more personal. I took a sip of the coffee. It was strong and hot, and exactly right. Fortified, I turned back to my work, but the dynamic in the room had shifted. The formal barrier between owner and employee had dissolved, leaving something else in its place. Something quieter, more tentative, and infinitely more interesting. We were just 2 men in a silent bar after midnight. one trying to fix something broken, the other watching him with impatience that felt like a gift. The first night, I only managed a diagnosis. A series of old electrolytic capacitors in the main amplifier had failed, leaking a sticky residue onto the circuit board. It wasn't a catastrophic failure, but it was enough to keep the machine silent. It would require careful, methodical work to replace them without damaging the delicate, brittle board. "I'll need to order the parts," I told him, wiping my hands on a rag. I had been on the floor for nearly 2 hours. My knees ached, but my mind felt clearer than it had in months. "They're specific, vintage parts. It might take a few days for them to arrive. Order whatever you need," Julian said without hesitation, pulling out a slim leather wallet. He handed me a credit card. "Use this, and add something for your time." I looked at the card, then back at him. "I told you, no charge," I insisted. I'm happy to do it." His gaze was steady. "I know, but your time is valuable, Leo, and expertise should be compensated. Please." The way he said it left no room for argument. It wasn't a command. It was a request grounded in respect. It wasn't about the money. It was about acknowledging my skill. Taking the card felt like another shift, another rebalancing of the scales between us. "Okay." I relented, my fingers closing around the cool, heavy plastic. "Thank you." He gave a small nod, a gesture of completion. "I'll see you tomorrow." Then he collected his coat and his briefcase. And with a final glance at me and the open jukebox, he was gone, the front door clicking shut behind him, leaving me alone in the quiet, cavernous space. I stood there for a long time, the credit card feeling warm in my hand, the silence of the room no longer feeling empty, but filled with a quiet sense of possibility. The next few nights fell into a new routine. I would finish my shift, the last customers would leave, and I would pull out the toolbox. Julian would already be there, working in his booth, or sometimes he'd arrive just as I was starting, bringing with him the scent of the cool night air. He never hovered, never supervised. He would just settle in, a quiet presence in the corner of my vision, and the bar would transform from my workplace into our shared space. He would make me a coffee without asking. Sometimes he'd bring food from a nearby restaurant that stayed open late. Simple things, like a container of soup or a sandwich on good bread. We didn't talk much during these times. The air was filled with the small sounds of my work, the scrape of a screwdriver, the soft hiss of the soldering iron, the quiet clicks of components being seated into place. But the silence wasn't empty. It was a comfortable, companionable quiet, the kind that exists between people who don't need to fill every moment with noise. I learned more about him in those silences than I ever had from the staff gossip. I learned he was a man of immense patience. He could sit for an hour, perfectly still, just reading a document. I learned he had a fondness for old jazz. The music that played softly from his laptop was always instrumental, full of moody saxophones and thoughtful piano solos. I learned that when he was concentrating, a small furrow would appear between his eyebrows, and he would unconsciously rub his thumb against the side of his index finger. My internal world, however, was far from silent. It was a constant churn of analysis and second-guessing. Every small gesture of his was something I would turn over and over in my mind. The coffee was just a kindness, I'd tell myself. He was being a good boss, making sure his employee was comfortable while doing him a favor. The food was just practical. He knew I was working late and hadn't had a chance to eat. But a more hopeful, more dangerous part of my brain would whisper otherwise. It would point out the way his eyes would linger on me when he thought I wasn't looking. It would replay the low timbre of his voice when he'd say my name. I was terrified of misreading the signals. The power imbalance between us was a constant, unspoken presence. He was wealthy, established, powerful. I was his bartender, living paycheck to paycheck. It would be so easy for me to project my own yearning onto his simple acts of decency. I was a man starved for connection, and he was offering a glass of water. I had to be careful not to mistake it for a feast. So I kept my head down, focused on my work, and treated his kindness with a polite, professional gratitude that felt increasingly dishonest. One night, while I was carefully desoldering an old capacitor from the board, my hand slipped. The hot tip of the soldering iron grazed the back of my other hand. I hissed in pain, dropping the tool onto the protective mat I'd laid out. The burn was small, but it was sharp and immediate. Before I could even react further, Julian was there, kneeling on the floor beside me. His movements had been so swift and silent, I hadn't even heard him get up. "Let me see," he said, his voice laced with a concern that felt startlingly personal. He gently took my hand, his fingers cool and firm against my skin. His touch sent a jolt through me that had nothing to do with the burn. He turned my hand over, his thumb brushing lightly against my palm as he inspected the small red mark. He was so close I could see the individual silver threads in his hair, the faint lines etched at the corners of his eyes. "It's nothing," I said, my voice tight. I tried to pull my hand back, suddenly overwhelmed by his proximity, by the casual intimacy of his touch. He didn't let go. His grip was gentle but firm. "It's not nothing," he countered quietly. "Stay here." He released my hand and disappeared behind the bar. A moment later, he returned with the first aid kit and a clean, damp cloth. He knelt in front of me again, the space between us charged with an unspoken energy. He carefully cleaned the small burn and applied a soothing salve from the kit, his touch methodical and incredibly gentle. His head was bowed, his focus entirely on my hand. I watched the top of his head, the way his dark hair swirled around the crown, and I had the sudden, insane urge to reach out and touch it. My heart was hammering against my ribs. This was more than just the kindness of a boss. This was care. This was a level of personal attention that crossed a line I had been so careful to draw. He finished by placing a small bandage over the spot, his fingers lingering on mine for a fraction of a second too long. "There," he said, finally looking up at me. His gray eyes were dark in the dim light of the bar, and they were filled with an expression I couldn't quite decipher. It was concern, yes, but there was something else beneath it. Something deeper, more vulnerable. "Be more careful, Leo." He stood up, his knees cracking softly in the quiet room. The moment was broken. He returned to his booth, and I returned to my work, but the air between us was different. The accidental touch had become a deliberate, meaningful one. The unspoken tension had been given a voice, a physical manifestation. And now, the silence was no longer comfortable. It was heavy with things unsaid, humming with a new and terrifying electricity. I couldn't pretend it was just about the jukebox anymore. The replacement parts arrived on a Friday. A small box of carefully packed vacuum tubes and capacitors that felt like jewels in my hand. This was the final stage. If this worked, the jukebox would live again. The thought filled me with a mixture of pride and a strange sort of sadness. The project, this quiet ritual I had come to cherish, was nearing its end. Our nights of shared silence were numbered. That evening, the atmosphere in the bar felt different, charged with anticipation. I worked my shift on autopilot, my thoughts constantly drifting to the task ahead. Julian was there, as usual, but he seemed more restless than I had ever seen him. He barely touched his paperwork, his gaze continually drifting over to the corner where the Wurlitzer stood waiting. When the last customer left, I didn't even wait to clean up. I pulled out my tools, my hands moving with a nervous energy. This was it. I carefully installed the new capacitors, my soldering work neat and clean. Then came the tubes, seating each one into its socket with a satisfying click. Everything was in place. All that was left was to reconnect the main power and see if its heart would beat again. As I reached for the final wire, I realized I needed to shift the machine just an inch to get the proper angle. It was too heavy to move on my own without risking damage to the floor or the machine itself. "Julian," I called out, my voice sounding louder than I intended in the quiet room. He was by my side in an instant. "What do you need?" "I need to move it back, just a little, to get this last connection seated properly. Can you take that side?" I pointed to the opposite corner. "Of course," he said. We knelt on either side of the jukebox, facing each other. Our hands found purchase on the solid wooden frame. "On three," he said, his voice low and steady. 1, 2, 3. We lifted in unison, the old wood groaning in protest. It was heavy, and for a moment, we were locked in a shared effort, our muscles straining together. Our faces were only a couple of feet apart. I could see the concentration etched on his features, the slight sheen of sweat on his brow. In that moment, we weren't owner and employee. We were partners in a single, focused task. We were equals. We slid the machine back that crucial inch, then lowered it gently to the floor. "Got it." I breathed, my arms aching slightly. "Good," he replied, his voice a little strained. He didn't move away. We remained kneeling, the silent jukebox between us like a shrine. The physical exertion had broken through the last of the formality. We were just two men, breathing a little heavily in the dim light. He looked at me, and his carefully constructed composure seemed to crack for a second. A wave of something, vulnerability, weariness, something deeply human, washed over his features. This machine, he started, then paused, as if weighing his words. It was my father's. He bought it for the original bar he owned, a little place upstate. When he passed, it was the only thing I wanted. It's been silent for almost a year. I thought it was gone for good. The confession hung in the air between us, simple and profound. It wasn't just a broken piece of equipment to him. It was a memory, a connection to his past, and I was the one he had trusted to fix it. I'm glad I could help, I said, the words feeling inadequate. He held my gaze, and his next question felt like it came from somewhere else entirely, a place far deeper than our current situation. Leo, he said, his voice soft. I hope my being here every night hasn't felt intrusive. Like I was watching over your shoulder. The question was an open door. He was acknowledging the power dynamic, the potential for me to feel pressured or scrutinized. He was giving me a chance to voice any discomfort, to reset the boundary if I needed to. It was an act of profound respect, and I chose to walk through that door with the truth. No, I said, my voice shaking slightly. Not at all. I've enjoyed the company. A slow smile spread across his face, and this time it reached his eyes, crinkling the corners and filling them with a light that stole my breath. It was a smile of pure, unadulterated relief. Good, he whispered, as if the word itself was a weight lifted from his shoulders. I have too. The moment stretched, shimmering with unspoken emotion. He had revealed a piece of his past, a sliver of his vulnerability, and in doing so, he had invited me to do the same. The foundation between us, built on quiet nights and shared coffee, had just settled a little deeper, becoming something stronger, something more real. With my heart still beating a frantic rhythm against my ribs, I turned back to the jukebox. My hands were shaking, but my purpose was clear. I reached into the back of the machine, my fingers finding the final connector. I pushed it into place. It seated with a firm, satisfying click. For a moment, nothing happened. The silence in the room was absolute, a held breath. I felt a pang of disappointment, a fear that I had failed. And then, a low hum started deep within the machine. A warm, golden light began to glow from behind the colored glass panels, illuminating the intricate chrome and the titles of the records held within the carousel. The empty silence of the bar was filled with the soft whirring of gears and the gentle click-clack of the selection mechanism coming to life. It was breathing again. I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. I looked over at Julian. He was on his feet, standing a few paces away, his face a mask of awe and undisguised joy. The cool, controlled man I was used to seeing was gone, replaced by someone younger, more open. He looked at the glowing machine, then at me, and the gratitude in his eyes was so potent it was almost overwhelming. You did it, he said, his voice thick with emotion. Leo, you actually did it. I did, I replied, a slow, proud smile spreading across my face. I felt 10 feet tall. I had taken something broken and silent and filled it with light and potential. He took a step closer, his gaze fixed on the jukebox as the selector arm hovered, waiting for a command. The room was filled with its low, expectant hum. He turned his eyes to me, and the air between us crackled. The project was over. The buffer of my work was gone. It was just us now, in a room full of light and sound and unspoken feelings. Well, then, Julian said, his voice dropping to a low, intimate murmur that vibrated right through me. Play us something. The words were simple, but the meaning was vast. Play us. Not, play me something, or let's hear it us. He was including me in the moment, in the celebration. He was turning this from a transaction, a job completed, into a shared experience. My mind raced. What do you play in a moment like this? The choice felt monumental, as if the entire future of whatever this was between us rested on the 3 minutes of music I was about to select. My fingers hovered over the buttons. I could pick something upbeat, a classic rock and roll tune to celebrate the machine's revival. I could pick some of the cool jazz he favored. But my heart pulled me in a different direction. I was tired of hiding, tired of being careful. In that moment, I wanted to be honest. I wanted the music to say the things I was too afraid to speak aloud. My finger found the buttons. B7. A song I knew was in there. A song of longing and discovery and the profound relief of arrival. The selection mechanism sprang into action with a series of decisive clicks. A 45 revolutions per minute record was lifted from the carousel, a small black disc of vinyl and hope. The tone arm swung over, hesitated for a perfect, dramatic beat, and then lowered itself into the groove. A soft crackle, and then the first mournful, soulful notes of Etta James's voice filled the room. At last, the sound was rich and warm, pouring from the old speakers with a fidelity I hadn't expected. The music swelled, filling every corner of the silent bar, wrapping around us. I didn't dare look at Julian. I kept my eyes on the spinning record, on the glowing lights of the jukebox, my heart pounding in time with the slow, deliberate rhythm of the song. My lonely days are over, and life is like a song. The lyrics were a confession. It was too much, too on the nose. I had been reckless. I braced myself for him to laugh, to make a light comment, to break the spell and return us to the safe ground of owner and employee. But he said nothing. The only sound was Etta's voice, pouring her heart out into the space between us. Slowly, I forced myself to turn and look at him. He hadn't moved. He was watching me, his expression unreadable, his gray eyes searching my face. The music swirled around us, a tangible thing. The world seemed to shrink until it was just the two of us, standing in a pool of golden light, bathed in the sound of a love song that was 100 years overdue. The song reached its crescendo, the final notes hanging in the air for a long moment before fading into silence. The whirring of the jukebox stopped. The record was returned to its slot, and the silence that returned was heavier, deeper, more profound than any that had come before. It was a silence that demanded an answer. Julian took a step toward me, and then another. He stopped when he was only an arm's length away. The faint scent of his cologne, sandalwood, and something else, something clean and warm, reached me. "Why that one, Leo?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. I met his gaze. My throat was dry. This was the precipice. I could retreat, make a joke, pretend it was a random choice. Or I could jump. I could be brave for the first time in a very, very long time. Because it felt true, I said, my voice hoarse. A flicker of something, understanding, relief, a deep and profound tenderness, passed through his eyes. He closed the remaining distance between us. He was so close now I could feel the warmth radiating from his body. He lifted a hand, not to touch my face, but to gently cup my jaw, his thumb stroking softly against my skin. The touch was electric, a confirmation of everything the song had just said. "Leo," he began, and his voice was thick with an emotion he no longer tried to hide. "I am very aware of my position here, of the difference in our ages, in our circumstances. The last thing I would ever want is for you to feel pressured, or for this to be anything other than what you want." He paused, his eyes searching mine, ensuring I was hearing him, truly hearing him. This wasn't a proposition. It was a catechism of consent. He was laying all the cards on the table, giving me every opportunity to walk away. "But I have to tell you," he continued, his thumb continuing its slow, mesmerizing rhythm against my jaw. "These past few nights, watching you work, sharing this quiet space with you, it has been the highlight of my year. I would like to get to know you better, outside of this bar. If that is something you would want." The sincerity in his voice was a balm on old wounds I didn't even know I was still carrying. He wasn't trying to own me or buy me. He was simply, honestly, asking. He was seeing me not as his bartender, but as a man, as an equal. All the fear, all the second-guessing, all the careful walls I had built around my heart, they just dissolved. In their place was a simple, shining clarity. "Yes," I breathed, the word a puff of air, a release. "Julian, yes. I would like that very much." The relief that flooded his face was beautiful to see. It was as if he had been holding his own breath, waiting for my answer. The careful mask of the stoic businessman fell away completely, leaving only the man, vulnerable and hopeful. He leaned in slowly, giving me every chance to pull back, to change my mind. I didn't. I met him halfway. His lips were softer than I had imagined, and the kiss was nothing like I expected. It wasn't a kiss of fiery passion or desperate need. It was a kiss of recognition. It was slow and deep and breathtakingly gentle. It was a quiet conversation, a promise, a a feeling of coming home. It tasted of expensive whiskey and relief. My hands, of their own accord, came up to rest on his chest, feeling the steady, strong beat of his heart beneath my palms. His hand moved from my jaw to the back of my neck, his fingers tangling in my hair, holding me there, grounding me. When we finally broke apart, it was only by an inch. He rested his forehead against mine, our breath mingling in the small space between us. We stood like that for a long time, in the warm glow of the resurrected jukebox, the silence of the bar no longer empty, but full of the beginning of a new song. "So," he murmured, his lips brushing against mine as he spoke. "Breakfast tomorrow?" I let out a shaky laugh, a sound of pure, unadulterated joy. "Yes," I said. Breakfast sounds perfect. The walk home that night felt different. The city streets, usually just a gray path between work and sleep, seemed vibrant and alive. The air felt crisper, the streetlights brighter. I felt a lightness in my step I hadn't experienced in years. But as I lay in bed, staring at the familiar cracks in my ceiling, a cold tendril of anxiety began to creep in, chilling the warmth of the evening. What had I just done? I had just kissed my boss. My very rich, very powerful boss. The reality of the situation began to settle in, heavy and complicated. The next day, walking into the croft for my shift was one of the hardest things I'd ever had to do. My stomach was a knot of nerves. How would he act? Would it be awkward? Would he regret it? Had I just completely destroyed the one stable thing in my life for a moment of impossible connection? I felt like every eye was on me, even though the bar was mostly empty, just the usual pre-dinner lull. I saw him before he saw me. He was in his usual booth, on the phone, his voice a low, professional murmur. He looked exactly the same, composed, in control, the picture of a man who ran an empire from a quiet corner of a bar. My heart sank. Maybe last night was just a fluke, a moment of emotional release over the jukebox that he now regretted in the harsh light of day. I busied myself behind the bar, polishing glasses with a frantic energy, trying to make myself as small as possible. A few minutes later, he ended his call. I felt his eyes on me, but I refused to look up. I could feel my cheeks flushing. Then I heard his footsteps approaching the bar. He stopped on the other side, waiting patiently until I finally ran out of glasses to polish and had no choice but to meet his gaze. His expression was soft, his gray eyes warm and completely free of any regret. He gave me a small, private smile that was just for me. "Good afternoon, Leo," he said, his voice the same calm baritone as always, yet there was a new undercurrent of warmth in it. "Julian," I managed, my voice a little shaky. He leaned forward slightly, lowering his voice so only I could hear. "Last night was important to me," he said, his sincerity cutting through my anxiety. "And I want to be very clear about something. Your job is your job. It is safe, and it is separate from this." He made a small, subtle gesture between the two of us. "We'll figure this out at our own pace. No pressure. Ever. Is that clear?" The knot in my stomach loosened, replaced by a wave of profound gratitude. He understood. He had anticipated my fears and met them head-on with reassurance and respect. He was actively working to dismantle the power imbalance between us, to create a space where I could feel safe, where I could have agency. "Yes," I said, my voice stronger now. "Clear. Thank you, good," he said. Then his smile widened slightly, a hint of teasing in his eyes. "I believe we have a breakfast date to reschedule. I was thinking Sunday. My place. I make excellent pancakes, his place." The thought was both thrilling and terrifying. But the offer was so simple, so normal. Pancakes. It grounded the entire thing in a comforting reality. "I like pancakes," I said, a real smile finally breaking through my nervousness. "I know," he said softly, and the quiet intimacy of that statement, the fact that he was still paying such close attention to me, sent another wave of warmth through me. Just then, Sarah, the evening waitress and my closest thing to a friend at the bar, came bustling in for her shift. "Evening, Leo." "Evening, Mr. Croft," she said cheerfully, her eyes darting between us. She was sharp. She missed very little. "Boss seems to be in an unusually good mood today," she added with a playful wink in my direction. "Wonder why?" I felt my face heat up again, but I looked at Julian. He simply met Sarah's gaze with a calm, pleasant smile. "Leo performed a miracle last night, Sarah," he said, his voice smooth as silk. He brought the Wurlitzer back from the dead. I think that's reason enough to be in a good mood, don't you? He had deflected it perfectly, giving a plausible explanation that was also the truth, while simultaneously giving me public credit for my work. He was protecting me. He was protecting us. He gave me one last, quick look, a look that said, "See? We've got this," before he turned and walked back to his booth. I turned back to my work, a genuine, unforced smile on my face. The anxiety was gone, replaced by a steady, hopeful calm. This was real, and we were going to be okay. Sunday morning arrived cloaked in a soft, gray drizzle. My nervousness returned as I stood outside the address Julian had given me. It was a historic brownstone on a quiet, tree-lined street, a world away from my cramped apartment building. The sheer elegance of the place was intimidating. I took a deep breath, straightened my shirt for the 10th time, and pressed the buzzer. The door was opened not by a butler, as some ridiculous part of my brain had imagined, but by Julian himself. He wasn't wearing one of his immaculate suits. He was in a simple gray cashmere sweater and dark jeans, his feet bare. He looked comfortable. He looked like home. His smile was warm and genuine as he ushered me inside. His apartment was nothing like I had expected. I had braced myself for sterile, minimalist luxury, a showroom of wealth. Instead, it was warm and inviting. The walls were lined with books from floor to ceiling. The furniture was a mix of modern comfort and antique character. There were photos on the mantelpiece, real photos, in mismatched frames, of a younger Julian with a man who I presumed was his father, both of them beaming beside a much younger-looking Wurlitzer jukebox. The air smelled of coffee and something sweet, and from a high-end sound system, a soft jazz piano melody played, the same kind of music he listened to at the bar. "Welcome," he said, taking my damp jacket. "I hope you're hungry." We spent the morning in his kitchen, a beautiful space of stainless steel and warm wood. And he was right. He did make excellent pancakes. We talked as he cooked and I sat at the large wooden island. We didn't talk about the bar, or my job, or his business empire. We talked about other things. He asked me about the furniture I used to build, and he listened with genuine interest as I described the grain of different woods and the joy of creating something solid and beautiful with my own hands. I asked him about the books that lined his walls, and he spoke with a quiet passion about history and poetry. We talked about our pasts, not in great detail, but in the broad, gentle strokes of people getting to know one another. He spoke of his father with a deep, abiding affection. I spoke a little about my failed business, and for the first time, the words didn't taste like ash in my mouth. He didn't offer pity or business advice. He just listened, his gaze steady and compassionate, and made me feel heard. After breakfast, we sat on the comfortable sofa in his living room, mugs of coffee in our hands, the rain tapping gently against the large window. It was then that he turned to me, his expression serious but kind. "Leo," he said, "I want us to be honest with each other about the context of all this." He gestured vaguely around the beautiful room. "The money, the age difference. I know these things can create complications. I want you to know that I want a partner, not a project. I want an equal. Your independence is as important to me as it is to you. We will always talk about it. We will never let it become the unspoken thing in the room." His directness was a gift. He was naming the elephants in the room, refusing to let them fester in the shadows. He was inviting me into a partnership built on communication and mutual respect. "I know," I said, my voice quiet but firm. "And I'm not. I'm not with you because of this." I mirrored his gesture. "I'm with you because of the man who notices how I take my coffee. The man who sat in a quiet bar for nights on end just to be near me. The man who asked before he kissed me." He reached out and took my hand, his fingers lacing through mine. The fit was perfect. "And I'm with you," he said, his voice low, "because of the man who saw something broken and, with patience and skill, made it beautiful again." It felt like the final piece clicking into place. The last doubt, the last fear, washed away. This wasn't a fairy tale about a rich man saving a poor boy. This was a story about two men who had been lonely in their own ways, who had found a quiet space to see each other clearly. A few weeks later, I was at his apartment again. It was becoming our place, a sanctuary away from the world. I had a key now, a small piece of metal that felt impossibly heavy with meaning. It wasn't a key to his wealth, but a key to his life, an invitation he had offered freely. We were in the kitchen, making dinner together. I was chopping vegetables while he stirred a sauce on the stove. It was a scene of such simple domesticity, it almost made my heart ache with its rightness. The air was filled with the scent of garlic and herbs, and in the background, playing softly from the speakers, was Etta James. At last, it had become our song. He came up behind me, wrapping his arms around my waist and resting his chin on my shoulder. I leaned back against his solid warmth, my knife stilled on the cutting board. We stood there for a moment, just breathing together, watching the city lights begin to glitter outside the kitchen window. "Happy," he murmured into my ear. I turned my head to kiss him, a soft, lingering kiss that tasted of contentment. More than I thought was possible, I whispered against his lips. Looking back, I could see the path that had led me here. It wasn't a grand, dramatic highway, but a quiet, winding road built of small moments. A silent jukebox, a shared cup of coffee, a gentle touch on a burned hand, a single song. Each moment was a brick, carefully laid, building a foundation that felt stronger than anything I had ever known. I was no longer the man who lived in a safe, predictable loop. My world was still orderly, but it was no longer small. It had expanded to include the warmth of this kitchen, the weight of this man's arms around me, the steady rhythm of his heart beating against my back. The difference in our ages and our bank accounts hadn't vanished. They were still part of the story, the context. But they were no longer a chasm between us. They were just details. The real story was us. It was the quiet intimacy of this moment. It was the feeling of being home. The music swelled, and I closed my eyes, profoundly grateful for the man who saw the potential for a song in my silence and had the patience to help me play it. Share your thoughts in the comments. What moment stayed with you? If the story resonated, a like helps others find it. Subscribe for more slow burn male/male love stories told with warmth and care.